Welcome to the Way of the Spiritual Path. My name is Ursula Lentine, and our guest today is Vanessa Kreitz. The Way of the Spiritual Path. Everything has its own way. I've got my way. Vanessa, I'm sure you've got your way.
I do.
Babies have their way, time has its way, traffic has its way. So when we understand the laws and principles of the way, then we can get either in the way or out of the way. My services are I do internal family systems, which is subconscious work. We're operating and behaving and responding to life from our subconscious. Our conscious is only like 10%. We think that's everything in charge. No, subconscious. So when we do that work, we get to understand our parts. One of the parts that are inside of many of us is addiction. We're going to be talking about addiction today. The name of our show is The Answer is in the Problem. Mm-hmm. And Vanessa here is a passionate, wonderful woman who really lives a life of service. Integrity is high, awareness is high, wanting to do good in the world. Mm-hmm. I see that and know that very much about you. And I appreciate you for that because I know it's not easy, it's hard work.
Yeah.
So today we're talking about addiction, and you are a long-term...
Yeah, I'm a person in long-term recovery. And so what that means is that I haven't had a drink in almost 12 years.
Awesome. Mm-hmm. Awesome. But every day maybe comes up or no? Or how does that work?
Actually, after the work that I've done, which I know we'll talk some more about it, the obsession to drink was lifted really early. And the work that I do, as long as I'm treating my alcoholism, then the obsession to drink does not return.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's probably really good for people to know that it doesn't have to be an everyday thing whether you do it or not.
Right. I mean, what happens is that sometimes the thought will occur, but it's like, oh, look at that. You know, like just an awareness. So it's not like an obsession or a compulsion. It's just a thought. You know, like if it's I'm at a party, God, a glass of wine would be nice. You know, but it's like
a thought that comes
and then it goes
bye, right. And then it goes instead of something that jumps on you and controls
not at all.
You.
Yeah,
excellent.
Yeah,
excellent. So we're going to talk about Carl Jung had an interesting quote around.
Yeah, so actually, there back in the 30s, maybe late 20s, early 30s. There were several people who were really pivotal in identifying alcoholism as a disease. And so alcoholism is a 3-part disease. The first one is the physical allergy. So when the alcoholic puts alcohol in their body, it triggers an allergy. So just like if you're allergic to strawberries and you break out in hives, for the alcoholic, bodily different than anybody else on the planet, you put alcohol in your body and it triggers an allergy which manifests itself in the form of a craving. So when you put alcohol in your body, you have to drink and drink and drink and drink and drink to overcome or to satisfy that craving. And that is absolutely beyond control. I mean, so completely powerless.
There's no willpower.
There's no. Yeah. Willpower has nothing to do with it at all. And a lot of people think that it does.
Yeah.
You know, just stop.
Just stop. What's the matter with you? Just stop.
It really just does not work that way.
So that works with the subconscious. Remember, the conscious is about 10% of what's going on, and the 90% is within our subconscious. Mm-hmm. So in my internal world family systems, the craving would be the addictive part.
Right. Absolutely.
And it doesn't really have a personality. It's just give me more, give me more, give me more.
But it's actually a medically proven physical allergy. And so the other part of it, and so if I never drank, it wouldn't be an issue, right? Because I've got this, physical allergy medical thing inside my body.
Okay.
But if I didn't drink, it wouldn't be a problem. But for the alcoholic, the second part of the disease is the mental obsession. And so that's the part that says, it wasn't that bad. Maybe I overreacted. Or it'll be different.
Gives excuses.
Totally. And any consequences that I had ever had were blotted out by this new thought that I could have just one, right? So it didn't matter how bad the consequences were. I couldn't bring that to mind with sufficient force to stop me from believing that part of the mind that says. So you mentioned Carl Jung. So that's the third part of it. So Dr. William D. Silkworth identified the physical allergy. He was the chief physician of Towns Hospital, which was the leading hospital specializing in drug and alcohol addiction in the 1930s.
Okay, there were if you study history, they partied so hard in the 1930s. Like
yes,
any
they did.
Movie,
right.
You could tell in the movies they were like,
Yeah.
let's just keep this on the lowdown. But you knew.
Yeah.
You knew.
Everybody was trashed
Party
all the time.
Animals.
Right.
Smoking like fiends, drinking for breakfast.
Yeah.
And who knows behind the scene the kind of drugs they were getting a hold of.
Right.
Because we think drugs are so modern right now. No.
And so they were sending these chronic alcoholics to insane asylums, and that they were hopeless.
Oh.
There was nothing anybody could do for them ever at all. They just needed to be put away in order for them to, save themselves, kind of thing.
And not influence other people.
Right. And the impact on families. I mean, alcoholism is not a single disease. It's a family disease that affects everybody that it touches.
For sure.
And so you mentioned Carl Jung. Carl Jung identified that the only way to overcome alcoholism or addiction was by having a spiritual awakening. So he met with a gentleman by the name of Roland Hazard, who went overseas several times to talk to him, and he couldn't understand why he kept drinking. So he had all of this self-knowledge, he'd done all of this work, he'd been to whatever.
So the 10% was really active.
Right.
But there was an answer that he couldn't find.
And so Carl Jung said to him, it hasn't happened often, but I've seen men, hopeless alcoholics in your situation, who have recovered from alcoholism. And it requires a vital spiritual awakening and a complete psychic change in order for that to happen. And that's what I've been trying to do in you, right? But it's your connection that's going to accomplish
to
that.
Spirit, right?
Absolutely.
Right. So when you say you've been trying to do in me, what do you mean?
Well, just like the medical professionals want to try to, like they do with moral psychology, and they're trying to self-awareness and whatever they're telling you to do, which is very helpful, right? But it doesn't accomplish what you need to accomplish.
See, it's the 10%.
Right.
So they're addressing people's needs with the 10%.
Right. And very well intentioned and very, very helpful.
Right.
I mean, I've definitely, leveraged, accessed that.
Okay, but what happens in my work that I do, the mind has to be satisfied to a certain degree in order to back off.
Yes.
So a trust level can come in and the subconscious work can start happening.
Right.
So I've read a lot of work on the 12-step. I have a lot of clients who are 12-step workers. And the 12-step is mind, but it keeps on pointing to the spiritual.
Right.
Pointing to the spiritual, pointing to the spiritual, pointing to the spiritual.
And that's the whole thing.
Yeah.
That is the whole deal.
See?
Behind the 12 steps.
Okay.
The whole deal is to get you to a power greater than yourself, because we are powerless. That's where willpower has absolutely nothing to do with it, because I have a tremendous amount of willpower.
I know this about you. If you have a task, it is done.
It's done.
I can count on you to get anything done.
Absolutely.
Right.
But I lack power when it comes to my alcoholism.
Okay.
Drug addicts lack power. This is not an issue of that.
Food
addiction, sex addiction.
And food's a tricky one because you have to eat. So, how do you eat but not eat, and how do you eat but don't let the addict get in touch of the food?
Right. And what the 12 steps allowed me to do is to get to that. So you clear away all of the stuff that is getting in the way of the sunlight of the Spirit, is getting in the way of my ability to be with you, right? And people in my family, and to be a worker among workers, and to live a happy, joyous and free is like the tagline in 12-step programs, that in order to access that, I have to get connected to God.
Okay. So did you have a spiritual awakening?
Yeah. So my very first spiritual awakening is when I put alcohol in my body. That was my first spiritual awakening.
Oh,
so I had been living. I was probably about 12 or 13 years old, and I had been living under, like, I couldn't. So the very first time I put alcohol in my body, and it hit my belly, it was like the first deep breath I'd ever taken in my whole life. My skin fit. I was safe. I was comfortable. I didn't hurt anymore, and that is a spiritual awakening.
Okay,
right?
so your reality kind of switched.
My entire reality changed
into something more comfortable.
Yes, and peace. Like, that's what I found. I found peace and comfort and ease, right? And so over the years, as my drinking progressed, I kind of crossed some lines. So the first line so I drank because I loved the way that it made me feel, right? And then I crossed this line where I was drinking to not feel, right? Or to change the way that I felt. And then the next line was I was drinking to not feel. And then toward the end, where I was drinking to breathe.
Okay.
And for oblivion. Like, I could not get enough in me.
To make everything go away.
Yeah, it just
So you were damned if you did, and you were damned if you didn't.
Right. I couldn't drink. I knew that I couldn't drink, right? Because of the consequences that, that I've had in my life. I knew that I couldn't drink, but I couldn't not. And that was what was so confusing and painful and difficult. And it was before I knew anything about the physical allergy, the mental obsession, or the spiritual malady.
You thought it was you.
I thought it was me.
Something's
and
wrong
everybody,
with me.
Absolutely, and everybody in my life thought it was me too.
So when they say the answer's within the problem, your first spiritual waking of drinking and going, whew,
yes,
I'm alive.
Right.
So that's one version
Right.
of it.
Yeah.
And then I notice when I work with people who have addictions and they're running addictions, that there's a lot of unlayering that has to happen before they even can separate themselves from the addiction.
Right. And for me, my experience was in the 12 steps. In the 12 steps.
To be able to experience you from the addiction.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
To clear all of that stuff away.
Yeah.
And I quit drinking every day.
What do you mean?
I quit drinking every single day. I'm never going to drink again. I'm never going to drink again.
You promised yourself.
Promised myself. In my 20s, I totaled a car in a blackout. Could have killed somebody. Luckily, I didn't.
Wow.
But I swore to God, I'm never going to drink again. I'm never going to drink again.
So listen, in that story, there must have been a lot of parts, because that one part in your head that you were describing that's like downplays the consequences and says, oh,
but that didn't happen for a couple of weeks, because I meant it. I meant it with every fiber of my being. I am done. I am never going to drink again.
So bring us back to the moment of, you hit the car, you totaled the car, and then you realize, oh my God, I've been drinking and driving. I'm screwed right now. Thank God I didn't kill somebody or myself, because you're a mom.
Yeah.
And there's a responsibility that mothers have that no one else has.
Right.
And then fathers have a certain responsibility, but the mother is like, really, you're not allowed to die.
Right.
Period.
Right.
So you must have had so many layers of emotions going on.
Sure.
Talk about that a little bit.
And not just in this experience, but I think just my very nature in active alcoholism, my constant companions were shame, fear, guilt, and remorse, right? Bewilderment, terror. I can't tell you how many mornings I would wake up after drinking, which I was drinking every day, that I was just mortified. I just couldn't, right? And so after the accident, I swore I'm never going to drink again. And I cannot tell you, and again, this is before I knew about the 3 parts of addiction. I can't tell you how it is I'm standing in the bathroom with my kid in the tub with a glass of wine in my hand. I have no idea how that happened.
So one day you're promising, you're feeling terrible, like you said, the blame, all those parts of you, those emotions living with you every day.
Yeah.
You're vacuuming, blame, shame.
Absolutely.
You're driving, blame, shame. You're having a conversation at a party, blame, shame.
Right.
So when we walk around with these heavy emotions, it really takes a toll on our self-esteem, on our faith,
right,
on our ability to trust ourselves about anything. So when you're promising, and then all of a sudden you're like, how'd this glass of wine get in my hand when my baby's in the tub. Like, what am I doing? Interesting.
Yeah. And what's interesting is that I didn't think, what am I doing?
Oh, because that part of you that blots out the consequences.
There I am.
Doesn't let the mind can't even save you.
No. Definitely not.
Forget willpower.
Yeah.
Forget logic and reason.
No. Completely insane. Complete insanity.
Wow.
And completely powerless against it.
I know people struggle with alcohol, but they don't get to that point of daily use. They're like, oh, I've got this. I'm managing. I've got my job. I got my relationships. Everything's fine.
Sure.
And they can manage, but they come home and they drink a beer or a glass of wine or a couple glasses of wine too. And then there's always the excuse. I always hear the excuse. Oh, I need to unwind, or oh, I have so much stress, or and then what I notice is there's a buffer for relationships. So the alcohol gets this like cloud going on.
Right.
So if you and I want to have a relationship, or I want to talk to you about something, or I want to connect with you heart to heart, there's a buffer between us. So it's you, the buffer, and then me. And it seems like I can never, like, hey, what's going on? Can I connect? Because this buffer is like this avoidance.
Right.
Avoiding the feeling, avoiding communicating, avoiding vulnerability, honesty. And it's frustrating to have a buffer all the time in relationships.
And I think it's really important with alcoholism in particular, is that there are a lot of people out there who drink alcoholically who are not alcoholics.
That's what I wanted to understand.
So the difference between somebody who drinks alcoholically, who may need help quitting, right, but who's not an alcoholic, given sufficient reason, losing a job, impending divorce, estranged children, given sufficient reason, they can quit. The alcoholic cannot. And that is the difference. That even when I honestly want to, I can't, like core of my being, when I honestly want to, I can't. And that when I drink, I have absolutely no control over how much I put in my body.
So the one who drinks but is not necessarily a physical alcoholic, but they have a dependency on alcohol for emotional reasons.
Sure.
Let's call it that.
Yeah.
It's to get to know their parts around why they drink in the first place.
Exactly.
And then the drinking can subside.
Sure.
So they could have a drink but not go into la la land.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Where the alcoholic, dealing with their emotions and everything, should not have a drink and just deal with their emotions.
Sure.
Okay.
But how do we do that?
Right.
Right. And that's what the 12 steps gave me, is the ability to live life successfly, and happy, and not drink and be happy about that. So like a lot of alcoholics are like, I'm not.
Life is over.
No, I just can't.
The
right?
1930s of
Right.
my life is over.
Right.
I can't party anymore.
Right.
I can't
Exactly.
socialize.
So
I
what
can't
does that
connect,
mean?
I can't have fun.
Right. Exactly. What does that mean? I remember walking around my house my first week of sobriety, looking, and I was very active, super high functioning, cars in the garage, PTA mom, awesome career that I was building. But I was a chronic alcoholic, who was dying. Right. And walking around my house in my first week of sobriety, looking around thinking, I don't know how to do anything.
Right.
I don't know how to do anything. What am I supposed to do? Because every single thing that I did in my life, I drank. Every single thing that I did, I drank. But I wasn't really I thought I wasn't really an alcoholic because, I was a PTA mom and I did have a career and high function, but man, I could not wait for 6:00 to get there so that I could pour that first glass of wine. And that spiritual experience that I had the very first time I drank, it happened every time I drank. All I needed to do was put a couple of drinks in my body.
Breathe again.
And I could breathe again.
Did you have a spiritual awakening? Was that car wreck your spiritual awakening?
No, it was not. So that was many years later. So my son was 1.5 years old when I had that car accident, and I didn't get sober until he was 10.
Okay.
So a friend of mine, I was sitting in her office, and like my life was falling apart. Not my outside life, but like I was dying. I needed to drink to breathe. And that's a really frightening place to be, right? And I'm sitting in her office and I'm just sobbing, like I can't stop and I don't know what to do. And she invited me to church. And it was the first time, and I was not a God girl, you know. It was the first time somebody said to me, do you want to go to church with me? And, you know, we're in the Bible Belt, right? Yeah. And it was the first time somebody said, do you want to go to church with me? And it wasn't, do you want to go to church with me? Right. You know, and I trusted her. And about a week later, I did. But I spent that first year, and the messages were great. And, you know, like I walked into there and had a spiritual experience, you know, like I just felt wrapped up by God, and they were singing God songs, and, you know, the messages weren't too dogmatic, and they were relevant. And, you know, so our family was able to, you know, experience that together. But I could not, I didn't want to get too close to anybody because I didn't want them to smell me. And I knew I was until 3-4 o'clock in the morning drinker, and then I'd get up at 6.
So you definitely reeked of alcohol.
Totally reeked.
But you were enjoying the church.
I was enjoying the church. So about a year later, and actually on July 25th of 2005, Bruce Wilkinson, who wrote The Prayer of Jabez, was giving a talk on another book that he wrote called The Dream Giver. And I got home that day and I looked in the mirror, and it was the first time that it was the first time I'd looked in the mirror in 10 years. And like really looked, right? And I was horrified at what was looking back at me. And I said a prayer that I remember to this day, verbatim. I said, God, please put your hands on me and keep me from harm. Please show me your plan and purpose for my life. I'm ready right now. And I don't know if you're real, but if you are, give it your best shot. And I was sitting in a meeting the next morning at 7:30. And that was July 24th. So that July 25th is my sobriety date. And I haven't found it necessary to take a drink since that day.
So your turning point was around surrender.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, I had prayed, God, please help me. God, please help me for years, right? Get me out of this. I will never do it again, you know, whatever. Please help me. And I think the difference between that prayer, the prayer that I prayed that day, and any other prayer I'd ever prayed, is that I coupled God, please help me with, I can't do it without you.
Right. It's the surrender.
It's the surrender. And that changed everything.
Yep.
And I think that, you know, God parted the clouds and said to the angels, go, go, go. You know, she's ready. She's open. Right.
Grab
she's
her
ready.
now.
I was like, God, please help me. I'm so ready, and I cannot do this on my own anymore.
Yeah. I call it when our face is in gravel and there's a boot on our other cheek and blood dripping from our nose.
Right.
And we're like tapping the mat.
Yeah.
I'm out. I'm good.
Right.
Come on. Like,
right.
I'm done.
Yeah.
My version of this is over.
Yeah.
You know, show me the idea that you have for me, like you said in your prayer.
Right.
Great. So, you know, wow, what a roller coaster ride.
Totally. And painful.
So what advice would you offer anybody who's struggling with this?
Well, I think the first piece of advice is to know, right? Is to be honest with yourself and the people in your life. I think in order to recover, you have to fully concede to your innermost self that you're an alcoholic or a drug addict or a food addict, or, you know, you have to have that kind of surrender, you know, that you really understand that it's a problem and that you're completely powerless. Call your friends, call your family, confide in somebody that you're struggling with this and that you're suffering, and that you can't stop. There are a lot of resources out there. For me and for millions and millions of people for, you know, over 81 years. The 12 steps there are more recovered alcoholics out of that program than I think any treatment,
any other
treatment. But there are treatment centers, getting with a good therapist who understands addiction. I have one who I've been seeing off and on for 10 years, because sometimes you need outside help to deal with some other stuff, and that's one of the ways I met you. And
looking for answers.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And being open.
When you did the subconscious work, you said in our first session, you've been doing treatments for how many years?
Well, my mother put me into therapy when I was 4, and I'm going to be 44 this year. So we're talking like 4 decades off and on of therapy, all different types of modalities. And I have a lot of healing. I've done some really, really great work. And I think the work that I did with you, it was life-changing. I was able to bring all of the work that I had done together, and integrate it for a place that, like, I was ready for you, right? Like I was so ready for you to bring all of that together, to find healing in a way that I had not been able to access before, right? And I think my surrender 12 years earlier was a big part of that, to find a connection with, to be able to be humble and willing enough to clear all of that away so that I could access God, or spirit or divine intelligence, whatever, is most comfortable for people. That I needed that in order to be ready for the work that I did with you. And I don't think that that's required to do work with you, at all. But for me, it brought everything together. And I had a degree of learning and healing, and
you were ready.
I was ready.
Yeah. I love working with clients who are ready. Yeah. They're just like, I'm done. I'm to the point of surrender. And just as like, whatever it is, I'm ready to face the demons, the darkness, the traumas, the dramas, the stories that we've been telling us, the stories we've been told to ourselves by everybody else in our family, the patterns, the patterns.
And I had done everything else. Right? Like I had already, and it a lot of it was very helpful, so it wasn't useless. It prepared me for you.
There we go.
Yeah.
Awesome. Wow. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
This, we talked about a life of service, and you do a lot of service work. And that's one of the things that you and I have discussed many times, how important it is when we're struggling with something, ego or addiction or whatever, to get out of our own way.
We have to. And that's one of the things that maintains sobriety. From whatever it is that you're recovering from, is the spiritual connection, prayer, meditation, and service. Like constantly getting out of myself. Because when I'm in a place that is not good and I can get there quickly, right? That stuff sneaks up, right? And then all of a sudden it's there.
Yes.
That the minute I put myself aside and I get into service,
we're done.
We're good. It's good.
Good.
It saves me every single time.
Yeah, the gifts keep coming because we're not self-centered.
Right.
Yeah. So thank you for joining us on The Way of the Spiritual Path with Vanessa Kreitz and Ursula Lentine. Join us next time on The Way of the Spiritual Path, the Lighter Side Network. Stay tuned.